the Everybody Matters podcast. This show is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at barry-wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. Great leaders know they have a responsibility for the people within their span of care. That includes all stakeholders, not just employees, but also customers. After all, customers are people too, right? In an economy where choice is abundant and earning attention is a challenge, leaders need to be more intentional than ever to drive true customer loyalty. Recently, Matt Whiat, the founding partner of Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute, Barry-Wehmiller's leadership and culture consulting arm, had an in-depth discussion on trends in customer loyalty with Barry Kirk, a new principal with Chapman & Co. And Barry's a recognized expert and thought leader in the loyalty marketing space with more than 15 years of experience advising companies on strategies for customer retention. Barry shares why most companies need to rethink their loyalty approach, why your customer experience can never exceed your employee experience, and why the foundation of loyalty starts with understanding that customers are human beings first. So here's Matt and Barry.
Barry, I noticed in your office, you have something written on your board and it says, customers are human beings first. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like something that you just say, of course that's true, right? Like, don't we all believe that? But the reality is, especially when we think about loyalty, we, for some reason, tend to forget that truth, that the customers who buy from you are actually people. And the reason I think that's very important to keep in mind, especially in the highly competitive marketplace we're in today, is what that says is you have a responsibility to understand what moves people. How do people think? What motivates them? What connects them? What creates memory for them? What gives them a desire to share an experience with other people? And the only way to really do that is to not think of them as just a consumption machine or just a line in your database, but to understand that they're people that you buy from. And I think it's amazing, in my experience, how powerful that is for marketers to reframe their thinking. When you are thinking of a customer as somebody who buys from you, you think in a very different way than when you say, my customer is actually a human being that I want to connect to.
And really, since we're talking about loyalty and the term gets thrown around a lot, how should we actually define loyalty when it comes to customers, these people first?
Yeah, it's a super critical question because for a long time, when people talked about loyalty or loyalty marketing, the most common definition would have been you would define a loyal customer by saying they are resistant to the competitive offer. So whatever price or product or service you had, it means that you would get them to the point where they would be like, I might want to go buy it from somebody else, but I guess I won't do that today. And that's an okay definition. And if that's the one you're operating with, it's not bad. It probably is helping your business financially. But here's a way better definition of loyalty, which is insistence on a particular brand experience. Meaning it's not just that I kind of put up with whatever you give to me, but I actually tell people I wouldn't go anywhere else. I wouldn't fly any other airline or buy any other coffee or wear any other pair of shoes. I insist on this brand because there's something that's connecting me so much that I finally just stopped paying attention to a competitive offer. I don't even resist them anymore. I just don't even pay attention to them. Way better definition of loyalty.
What's a good example of a company doing that right?
So I would say a brand that is really one of the masters at this is Southwest Airlines. And the interesting thing about Southwest is it has probably as many promoters as detractors. There are people that hate the whole experience of the way you line up for a Southwest flight. Yeah. But if you're okay with that way of lining up, what you find with that airline is you begin to see that they have a particular approach, a particular personality that people say, like, that's who I want to fly every time because I want to fly the airline where they sing to me during the flight safety messaging. Where the flight attendants or have a little bit of like a humorous approach to life, and they bring that out on the flight. Or where they have a capacity there for me to get a companion pass, so that for the person who's most important in my life, I can actually earn the ability for them to fly free with me all the time. And it's not to say other airlines aren't doing great things, but that is one way that particular brand for people says, I don't really want to fly anybody else, even if it might be less expensive on a given flight, because I've gotten used to that experience that they create for me.
Yeah, and the late, great Herb Kelleher right, the starter of Southwest Airlines, right? His premise was pretty simple. You take care of the employees take care of the customer takes care of the company. And we'll get back into that. But it's interesting we brought up Southwest Airlines as an example. So let's transition then. What about companies that are doing it wrong today when it comes to loyalty? What about that? What are the commonalities? Not really the name of the company, but what are the commonalities about companies doing it wrong today?
Yeah, usually when a company is challenged with, hey, we tried things with loyalty and it doesn't seem to be working. What are we missing? The first thing they're usually doing wrong is they are thinking too transactionally. And that's frankly something that a lot of marketers fall into. They were trained to do marketing, in a very transactional way, a very data-centric way, it's a smart thing to do. You want to be data-centric to be effective at marketing. But you also have to realize these are your most loyal people that you're trying to attract and retain and grow. And so you absolutely have to get out of that transactional state into a rational state with them. And ironically, the second thing that oftentimes marketers are doing wrong is even as they want to be data-centric, they're not really using that data in an effective way to make a better experience for their customers. Loyal customers, in exchange for whatever benefit you're giving them, say, you can have all my data. You can track all my behavior. But so often what you see is brands saying, yeah, we haven't really gotten around to using that data for anything. How do you use that data to say, well, I want to anticipate what Matt wants next without Matt having to tell me because he's been my customer for 5 years? That's where it gets really powerful. But too many brands just don't have the time or they just don't really understand completely how to take that data and make it sing for customers.
Maybe then give me the transition then from companies doing kind of marketing wrong or loyalty wrong into what about these loyalty programs? Is there a risk of these consumers getting just fatigued by it? I'm getting a lot of emails on my loyalty programs and we want you back and those type of things. Tell me about that.
Well, statistically speaking, most of us are in anywhere from 15 to 25 loyalty programs at any given time, right? So we all run the risk of being like, hey, I've seen that, I'm in a lot of programs. The reality is about 50% of all program memberships are inactive. So we join a lot more programs than we do anything in. So loyalty program fatigue is a real thing. And I certainly would say we would advise any company that's thinking, do I need a loyalty program? The answer to that question is maybe. You might need a loyalty program and you might not. But what I can say we know for sure is you absolutely need a loyalty strategy. And they're very different things. A loyalty strategy could be something that is programmatic, like a loyalty program, or it could just be focused on reframing how you use language with customers. How do you speak to them? It could be in your customer service. It could be in your employee culture. And so I certainly would say we would advise any company that hasn't launched a program yet, not to just assume that's the next place they have to go, but to say, I first want to establish a strategy. What does loyalty mean to me? How do we define it? How do we measure it? What do our customers want? And only then decide, is part of that strategy a program? If it is, great. But if not, there are lots of other ways you could be doing, putting that strategy into action to drive the result you're looking for.
This all sounds very simplistic then. So then what are organizations missing that's creating like this consumer fatigue on loyalty programs or just throwing more programs at it before doing the thinking of a strategy? What are they missing?
It really goes back, I would say, to that notion of customers being human beings first. So if you haven't quite gravitated to that yet, you're probably missing the more nuanced sort of understanding of how do people connect to an experience. So you tend to think, if you don't have that mindset, more in terms of how do I pay somebody to be loyal? And that actually works, right? We're all in points-based programs. We're in discount programs. That works, but it's very expensive for you as a company to pay your customers to be loyal. And the reality is, if you're doing this right, if you're connecting in a more relationship-based way, if you're activating things like people's drive to be connected to other human beings, feel part of the tribe, or the importance of experiences, you actually find that the right loyalty strategy puts you in a place where your best customers are willing to pay more to be your customer. They're not looking for the discount anymore. They're not looking for a give back in points. They just are at a level where they're expecting a different kind of experience, which you have to be smarter about to provide. But if you can get in that space, it actually is not only better for your customers, they're not only going to be happier, but the financial return is much stronger for you as a business.
Which is interesting, since we started with the example of an organization doing this right with Southwest Airlines. And oftentimes now, Southwest Airlines is not the cheapest fare. However, once I'm in that system and I enjoy that experience, but I have a lot of loyalty, that company does, toward flying Southwest.
That's absolutely right. I mean, I oftentimes talk about my experience as a brand loyalist for Starbucks. I mean, I don't think it'll be surprising to anybody listening to our conversation that no cup of coffee is worth $5 or $6. And it doesn't matter if you love Starbucks, you're going to go there. And Starbucks. One of the notions of their brand was the idea of Starbucks being the third place. So it was you have work and you have home, and in between there's Starbucks.
Uh,
That isn't really about coffee. That story of their brand isn't about coffee. It's about creating this refuge, this oasis between home and work. I think understanding the brand, that's when people say, like, how does Starbucks do such a great job attracting so much brand loyalty for expensive coffee? Because it's about something other than just the product or how much they charge.
since we're talking about different companies and we're talking about different products, are there also different kinds, or let's call them flavors, of brand loyalty?
Yeah, that's really important to keep in mind, especially if you're just starting to dig into what loyalty looks like for your company. Is we sometimes default to this thinking that loyalty is binary, right? So it's either on, off, either you're my loyal customer or you're not a loyal customer. But the reality is, just think of our own experience as human beings. When we attach to experiences, there are many different reasons we do that. So I might be loyal to you because of price. That may be the reason I'm loyal to you. I might be loyal to you because of the experience you provide. I might be loyal to American Airlines because they just provide a fantastic customer experience, and that's why I fly American Airlines. Or I might feel part of a tribe, right? So I might drive a Harley Davidson because I feel part of the pack of other people who drive Harley. So that's one thing that's really important, and particularly something we do in our work, is helping companies begin to understand what type of loyalty are you engendering right now, and what type would be more effective or more powerful to add to that kind of loyalty. That's really important.
Well, so is there a best type, or a type companies should strive for, or how does that work? Like, is everyone striving for being the Harley kind of tribal-based loyalty?
Well, any loyalty is better than no loyalty for sure. So if you're struggling with loyalty at all, sometimes starting with that financial base, that transactional loyalty, it gets people's attention fast. That's where you want to go. But the challenge with that, you always have to keep priming the pump. If your loyalty is prompt driven and discount driven and offer driven, guess what you have to do? You have to keep putting another offer in front of me, a deeper discount. If I can move into the kind of loyalty that's driven by my experience that I offer you as a customer, or even better, the tribe, well, guess what? That becomes sort of self-sustaining. Like, you don't have to remind me at some point that I'm part of that tribe. I'm telling other people I'm part of that tribe, right? And so if you think about that, that's not only way less expensive for you from a marketing standpoint, because I'm really driving my own behavior at that point. I become your brand advocate, and it's much harder for your competitor to come in and disrupt. I can always come in and disrupt somebody's 10% off offer with a 15% off offer. But if I'm part of your tribe, if I love the really interesting nuanced experience you give me, very difficult for a competitor to come in and disrupt that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Speaking of experiences, let's talk about tiki bars. I haven't met someone who actually this is a hobby, but for you, you want to talk about why it's a hobby and how it relates back into loyalty and experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I love tiki bars for all the obvious reasons that one might love to go into, bars with great rum drinks and fun decorations. But one of the things that's really important to me about tiki, and talking about as sort of an analogy to what you're trying to create with customer loyalty, is tiki bars do this amazing job of building out a very unique experience. That when you enter into a really great tiki bar, it's kind of as if the entire rest of the world disappeared and you're in a different place and a different time, where everything else just sort of falls away and you feel well taken care of, and you feel like you had this great sort of transporting experience. And then when it's over, and this is the really important part, if you had a great experience at a tiki bar, you really can't help but go tell other people about that experience and share it, because you want to revisit the memory, but you also want to share, and you also want to make people part of the tribe. You say, you could be somebody who goes to tiki bars with me. And the reason I use that as an analogy is not only just because it speaks to me personally in the work that I do, but it's something where I suggest that you think, what are those kinds of experiences that you have in life that really have nothing to do with your company or brand, but are those experiences that you'd say, man, that's so powerful. It drives memory, it drives emotion, it drives social connection. If I could just take 10% of that and have it be the experience that I create for my hotel, for my airline, for my manufacturing firm, for my retail company, for my bank, Well, you really got something very powerful there to build loyalty with. And so sometimes I say the best place to start when thinking about loyalty is to think about those experiences that drive you, and what made you loyal to something.
What's one piece of advice then you would give someone, an organization who wants to think differently? They've heard this. They're like, what's the piece of advice you leave them with about thinking differently about their brand loyalty?
If I was trying to think differently brand loyalty wise, and particularly if I'm the person who's listening to this conversation right now, because yesterday my manager said, "Hey, we need a loyalty program. Go figure out what that's supposed to look like." The first place that I would start is reframing your thinking away from, okay, our best customers are the people who buy a lot of stuff from us. So put that thinking aside and replace it with this thinking, which is my best customers are people who are in my span of care. They're in my span of care. And I know at Chapman, that's a phrase we oftentimes use when we're talking about employees, but I think it's just as powerful when we're talking about your best customers. Because if I start looking at my best customers, not as people who spend X number of dollars a year, but rather people in my span of care, well, I actually already am well down the path of understanding what's the experience I've got to create for those people. It will not be hard to figure it out because you begin to understand what you're really trying to do and accomplish. You can just get that frame of mind. I think you're really off to a good start of your loyalty approach.
Hey, Barry, I'm going to give you a statement. I'd like you to react to this one. Your customer experience can't effectively exceed your employee experience. What does that mean?
Well, I think if you thought about your best customers, your most loyal customers, and you said, well, what part of our brand are they experiencing? So much of that experience that they're having is directly coming from the employees who work for your company. Now, you might say, okay, that makes sense to me because I have frontline employees. I'm in retail, I'm an airline, I'm a hotel, and I have that. You might be a company that says, well, I don't have employees that interact directly with my customers. How could that be true? But when you think about it, what about the products that you provide? Who is creating those products? If somebody is providing a service, who's providing that service? Who creates the language that you use to talk to the market? All of those things are your employees. So if your employees aren't feeling fulfilled, if they aren't feeling cared for, if they aren't feeling like the place that they work is a place that is caring for them, then it's very difficult for them to then turn around and create products that speak to customers, to create services that speak to customers, that use the right language, that make customers feel valued and cared for. And so I think it's sort of a no-brainer when you look at it, that a company that isn't solving for comfort or engagement of their employees is going to have the same challenges of creating engagement for their customers.
And you've done some research in this. You guys ran some proprietary kind of surveys to kind of dive into this. Tell me about customer loyalty, loyal customers, and why they care about values, about purpose, about your culture inside, your reputation. Tell me about what some of your research has shown.
So we recently did a survey of US-based consumers, and one of the things we asked them about was, do you care about company values? And more importantly, do you care about reputation? And we really separated those two out, meaning values are sort of your stated market presence. What do we say is important to us? And reputation is how you live into that. And those can be the same thing, hopefully they are, or they can be really different things. And when they become different things, sometimes that's where brands get in trouble. And we definitely found that consumers were saying, yes, we do find values important. We want to know what your values are, and we want to know that you live into them. But more importantly, consumers who identify as brand loyalists, right? And not every consumer does. Some consumers say brand loyalty doesn't mean anything to them. But if you identify as a brand loyalist, you are 2 times more likely to say you also care about company culture and values than the non-loyalist. And that makes sense to me, Matt, because when you think about it, if I'm loyal to a brand, then I have chosen to stick by that brand, right? I'm not just there because it's the most convenient, but because there are other drivers that make me want to connect to it. It might be, if you're doing it really well, that brand is becoming part of my self-identity. And so it makes total sense to me that you begin to think about, okay, what are the values of this brand? Do they align to me? And how are they living them out in the marketplace?
This is great. And tell me about, this is really poignant with recent history. Tell me about employees who felt well cared for during COVID. What did your research show you with those?
So, of course, we've been living through this very crazy time the last year, and some companies have done a great job of caring for their employees, and others have really struggled during this period. But what we found in this same study, when we asked people to think about themselves as employees, was when you felt cared for, cared for as an employee during this period? Did it change how you interacted with customers? And what we found is if you said, yes, I absolutely agree that my company took care of me during this period, you were also way more likely in our survey to say, and I feel safe taking risk to deliver a better customer experience, right? So that's really about empowerment from the way I look at it from the employee side. It's saying the company that takes care of me is also the company where I feel safe to do what I need to do to make our customers loyal. And so it's totally this virtuous circle that's so powerful. The challenge is that we often don't look at these as the same things, though. And I know you know that, Matt, from the work we do on the employee side of the world, is that oftentimes these are two very different conversations that are being had inside of a company. One side is the employee conversation, and the other side is the customer conversation, and they're not really kept together.
And the question would be, well, why isn't that? Because as you mentioned, employees that felt well cared for during COVID were twice as likely to say they felt safer to take risks to improve a customer experience. So to your point, why are companies looking at the employee experience and the customer experience? Why aren't they looking at that holistically? That, to your point, one drives the other.
Yeah, I definitely have a thought on that. I would love to hear your thought on that too. From my standpoint, one thing is that, they're just two different groups with different objectives being given to them inside of a company. Generally speaking, it's HR professionals who are focused on company culture and the employee experience, and marketing professionals are focused on customers and customer experience. The other thing that's really challenging, though, is that those two groups not only are basically siloed inside of most companies, they have very different success metrics. You've got HR professionals probably looking at something like an employee net promoter score, an employee engagement score, and you've got marketers looking at, well, what do marketers always look at? They look at ROI, they look at financial outcomes. And because the two groups are having very different conversations with different success metrics, I think that it tends to make it difficult for them to sort of, how do I translate this into a single conversation? But Matt, do you see other things that potentially are keeping these two teams apart inside of companies?
Yeah, I like where you're going with this. The other thing that happens is inside of an organization, so as an example, I think most organizations look at it and they think, I invest in technology. I have a technology aspect. I have a human capital aspect. But I look at technology as being an investment. This is what I'm going to buy. This is what we're going to purchase. Here's the integration. I look at people as just an expense. I actually don't look at them the same way, which is so interesting to us that the way as I invest in people, it's an investment in my ROI. If I can see the linkage between the inside culture and outside experience. One of the other reasons I look at this and think, is it more challenging for a company to see the linkage? They do see it when it happens. Okay, here's one of my employees, and they're directly relating to the customer. And therefore, I might give that employee customer service training as an example. I don't know that we look at the overall environment that employee is in, how they interact with how shared services is teaching, literally how the entire organization treats one another. How I'm treated is how I can treat someone else. It's not rocket science when we get into an airplane as an example, and the flight attendants haven't been treated well. They're on a very long shift. Do I expect great customer service from them? No, it's because I'm not treating them very well. I don't just mean in that one role, but I think oftentimes we don't look at the overall holistic organization and the culture and say, how are we as someone experiencing and how are we caring for the people who are supposed to care for our customer?
Yeah, I think that's so correct. And really what it comes down to, right, is empathy. How I'm cared for helps me think about how other people need to be cared for by me. One of the other interesting findings of this survey that we just ran is that we found that customers who identify as super loyal, so they're more loyal than anybody else, are twice as likely to say, but I've also found myself feeling more empathy for employees of companies I work with during the pandemic. So saying, I was okay that certain things didn't go as well because I realize these employees are trying as hard as they can. So if you've got empathy coming from the customer side, you better have empathy coming from the employee side. But until you've been cared for as an employee, it's really hard to connect that through to the customer. So I think it's one of those things where when it works, it's a virtuous circle, and when it doesn't work, it's a mess, really.
Yeah, and I think we see this in industries all over. So in the medical community, because it's been so highlighted during COVID, we talk about the patient and how important that is. And of course that is. And we're caring for the patient. And then the next question is, who's caring for the caregiver? If I'm a teacher, well, the teacher is focused on the kid and making sure that the child's growth is there. Well, who's caring for the teacher? And I love that we use the phrase now, essential workers. I would say that if you're in your organization, everyone is essential. How we treat each other emanates out into how we're treating our customers. So if that's all true, should we be more connecting culture and values work to a customer financial outcomes? Like, can I link all this and say it's all a return on investment?
Yeah, it has to be all return on investment at the end of the day, right? And I think ultimately that's where bringing these two disciplines together, employee experience engagement and customer experience engagement, actually creates a much more powerful driver for doing culture work in your company. If you're the HR professional who's saying, I'm having a hard time making the case for us to increase employee engagement scores, or to focus on our culture, or to do work around leadership, or what our value statements are. Well, one of the things you could do to improve that by connecting more with the marketing side of your organization is saying, when we improve employee culture, I can actually use the same metrics that marketing professional is using to say where we have better employee engagement, where we have higher employee promoter scores, we actually have better customer outcomes. We see happier customers who spend more money. But it's very difficult to begin to use those ROI metrics on employee engagement and culture work without having that conversation between those two parts of the organization, the marketing department and the HR department.
There's probably something, if we can mention this, because it sounds almost borders on the concept of manipulation. Like, okay, so I can get a bigger return on investment if I just do some little nice things, value statement on my website with my employees. But I think there has to be something a little deeper here that says a return on investment. The return isn't just, yes, I'm a more financially productive organization. I'm also an organization that becomes the employer of choice. I'm the organization whose employees can give more to the community. I'm an employer where my employees, their growth didn't stop after they left formal schooling. I'm literally a part of the growth in society. I know for some people that's a huge leap on this. When we think about what's my return on investing in people, oftentimes for, I think, the more holistic and the more intentional, aware organizations, they realize there's a greater return in addition to just finances. Thoughts on that?
Well, there's definitely a greater return, but I want to go back to what you said about manipulation, because I think that is tempting to do. You say, okay, great. So we just have to say the right things and people think we're awesome. But what we found in our recent research was that it was actually more important how you scored on reputation than how you scored on your value statement. So customers care what you say you are. They care more how you live that out. And if I think about just during the last year, two brands that had that really brought to the forefront for them in a not so positive way were SoulCycle and CrossFit. So two kind of lifestyle brands in the exercise space, but they each had troubles this year around a value system they expressed turned out maybe not to be what their customers thought it was. They said they were one thing, and then they had PR issues where the market said, no, you're actually not living into those values at all. You violated those values. And they, as a result, had huge number of customers defect from those brands in the last year. So it's as important that you establish a value system, but that you live into them in order to achieve that additional ROI out of it. Because if you don't, then you actually could end up the exact opposite happening.
And before we wrap this up, let's end on a positive note with organizations that have done it really well. So as an example, Starbucks during COVID, one of the things they did was they extended a mental health screen for any employees that needed some help with dealing with increased stress, increased anxiety. They've been big about employee education, doing a deal with University of Phoenix. What other organizations come to mind that you look at and said they lived their values out and customers responded during the COVID time?
Well, I would say at the sort of large enterprise level would be Southwest Airlines, because they made a decision early on not to lay anybody off during this last year with the pandemic, right? And so I didn't fly Southwest once in the last year, but I remain loyal to them because of that. But the other thing I would add is we don't even have to go to big companies. Think of all the small businesses that we're all going out of our way for right now to make sure that they stay in business because of the values of those businesses, to keep maybe 5 or 10 employees employed, right? And so we go to that little corner grocery store, or we do carry out from a restaurant, not because it's easy to do. Sometimes it's a pain to go do that, but we're like, but I want to make sure that restaurant still is in business afterward. And it's because those restaurants and those little stores have made a commitment to keeping a certain number of employees employed. And so that's where I think it really comes in. Living out your values is so critical. But if you do it right and you treat your employees in a certain way, it's gonna pay off for you in the long run financially with your customers.
And which is a great transition as we wrap up this conversation. The phrase that's happened during COVID-19 has been, we're all in this together. So how about one single, simple, unifying concept that would help companies at least take the first step into thinking more about this integrated approach? What's your thoughts on that?
The framing that I like is one we use frequently here in our work at Chapman and Co. And I would suggest that for anybody who wants to take the first step in this is book the meeting. Book the meeting where you sit down. There's an HR professional there. There's a marketing professional there. Maybe you've never talked at your company before. Or you just pass in the hallway, and have that meeting and start with acknowledging, you know what? We each have a group of people who are in what we would call our span of care. That's the phrase I would use. I have customers in my span of care. The other person says, I have employees in my span of care. And we know that they are linked. These people are in the same experience together. One is impacting the other. And if these two groups are in our span of care, what does that mean for us? What does that mean we need to deliver for them? How do we empower them? How do we know that we're succeeding? And if you just use that one framing as sort of the common thinking, it really begins to help you move down a path of how do we bring these two pieces together, and how are we successful at doing that in a way that many other companies have not yet been able to do. It'd be pretty powerful, I think, if you could do that.
Now, I think change your language, changes the mindset, change your organization. And never before, we've used span of care versus span of control, or a person reports to me. We've used the phrase span of care to denote a leader's responsibility. I think never has that been more prevalent and poignant and accurate than the time that we're in now, that I have audiences, there are customers, there are employees, but they're all people first, and they're all in my span of care.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to find out more about Chapman & Co. Leadership Institute, find out about their services, attend a webinar, or just get some great insights, go to ccoleadership.com. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia's book, Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on this book, the book, this podcast, and a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at Barry-Wehmiller.com, on Twitter at Barry-Wehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. Take care.